What's up, guys? I'm Uncle Freedom, coming to you on a glorious and well-deserved day off. How's it going? First thing, y'all like, subscribe, do the whole YouTube thing, man, because I now got to put a whooping on the algorithm because my life has been hectic enough. I have not been making consistent videos, so any help from you guys is much appreciated. If you're looking to get in touch with me or find out more about the things I talk about, look down in that descriptor somewhere. There will be something that says more. Do the thing where it says more. So, lots of weird stuff going on as I filmed this video. Glock has now announced they're discontinuing all firearms, basically. I don't know. We'll get more into that in a different video. I don't have enough info for me to speak eloquently on it, and I don't talk about things that I don't know, or I try not to. So, I am going to show guns today. All guns are safe and clear, and I'm in a safe area of my home, which I performs maintenance, and I work on firearms. I dry fire down here, all that fun stuff. Nobody's going to get got through the internet, so let's get started. So I am an educational channel. I put out information meant to help people around me make better and more informed decisions with their hard-earned money, but I don't sell anything. YouTube, I don't sell anything at all. I simply provide good information for people to use if they should decide to purchase things. So something I've been asked a lot about, and it's because I spend so much time around this, is kind of a more basics thing. Not basics, well, basics on a lot of stuff. And I figure we'll do a series of videos. I will add to these as I can. They will go on a playlist, and it'll just be called Back to the Basics. But the first one we need to start on is handguns. And this started in a conversation I was having in a Facebook group where a guy was talking to me about how, oh yeah, if you have a hammer-fired pistol, you have to have a safety, and all kinds of other stuff that was not really true. And I am really not understanding of bad information when information exists everywhere, so I figured I'd put it all in one place. So when we talk about handguns specifically, right? What is a handgun? Well, a handgun is a firearm that you can shoot with your hand. Hold it in your hand. It is a tool of convenience for concealed carries, home defense, self-defense. Great for things like USPSA and pistol shooting competitions. It is a tool of convenience. It is also the hardest platform to shoot effectively. And a lot of people can be easily overwhelmed when you go to buy a new gun, especially if you're not really deep in this. But I've seen some guys that are gun owners, have been shooting guns for 7 or 8 years, that don't know some of the stuff I'm going to say today. So at its core, we have a handgun, right? Goes in your hand. Again, we are still clear, everybody. It goes in your hand, and you can fire that while it's in your hand, hence the term handgun. Now, where the confusion comes is because there is an awful lot of semi-great and not so great information about firearms themselves and what having a particular firearm means or what it doesn't mean. People just don't know some of this stuff. So I figure we need to start somewhere, and probably the easiest place to start is you have really two kinds of handguns. You have semi-automatic and revolver. A semi-automatic platform is semi-automatic. And what that means is, once I have chambered this the first time, when I fire a round, it will extract that round, eject that round out of the firearm, and then the slide will go forward, loading a new round off of the magazine that is inside of the grip. A revolver has a revolving cylinder right here, this thing, right? This is the effective magazine of your revolver. And when you fire this, it advances the cylinder, rotates, it revolves around a center axis and puts a new round in line with the forcing cone and barrel, allowing you to fire the gun. Cool, right? Science. Not really. Just terminology, guys. It matters. Words matter. So, semi-auto versus revolver. Now, there is a lot of myths and misconceptions about semi-automatics versus revolvers. And here's the thing I'll leave you with as far as that goes. Revolvers are incredibly tolerant of neglect. You could load a firearm and leave it in your sock drawer for the next 37 years, and I can almost guarantee you with 100% certainty if that ammo still works, if you pull it out and run the firearm, it's going to fire that round. But they are incredibly intolerant of abuse. Revolvers can be more consistent, but the problem is things like the ejection star on this guy, little bits of dirt, oil, anything will bind this firearm up to where it is completely unusable, and it happens at a pretty stiff rate. For example, it is not uncommon to have a semi-automatic platform and be at a class and shoot 1,000 rounds over the course of about a day and a half and do very little work to that firearm. You are not going to do that with a revolver. At a revolver, if you're much over about 120 rounds, you need a toothbrush in your back pocket to start doing things to keep the firearm working optimally, because they just don't work the same way. This is more finely tuned. There's a lot of machine work in there. We have a lot of things that have to interface and work together for this to work effectively. You need springs, and springs make things do things, right? Like, simplified version of it, but that is the two basic variants we have for a handgun. Now, then you run into the next problem, which is single action, double action, DASA, DAO, SAO. Got a lot of different stuff going on there, and that can be really overwhelming, but we're going to break it down really, really quickly for you. So, double action, single action refers to the action of the trigger itself. Meaning, if you have a double action firearm, the trigger performs two actions every time you pull the trigger. If you have a single action firearm, that trigger does one thing and one thing only. To demonstrate this in something like this 627 Pro I have here, this is a double action, single action revolver. Meaning, when I pull this trigger, the act of pulling the trigger will cock the hammer and rotate the cylinder to the next available shot, and then it will break that shot once I reach the sear engagement. Two actions, double action for a trigger. It is cocking the hammer, rotating the next fresh round, and dropping that hammer onto that round, versus single action. Single action, we can show in the same firearm. When the hammer is back, you will notice when I pull this hammer, the trigger will move to the rear and the cylinder will revolve to the next available thing. This is now single action. So when I touch this trigger, I have a very crisp, like 2.8 pound single action that does nothing but drop the trigger in that single event. So that is the difference between double action and single action. Now, freedom. Semi-automatic platforms like a Glock gotta be single action, right? Because all we're doing is pulling the trigger, right? Because it's got a striker in it. So we should probably talk about that part next. You have two firing mechanisms available to you in the handgun world, and that is striker fired or hammer fired. Period. Like those are the two you have, right? You have striker fired versus hammer fired. So a hammer fired pistol, no surprise, has a hammer on it. That hammer, once it hits the sear line, drops down, smacks the firing pin, or has the exposed firing pin on the hammer, hits the primer of the round. Round goes boom, leaves the firearm. You hit what you're aiming at if you did your job right. Versus striker fired, which has an internal striker that is spring loaded. And as you pull the trigger, it breaks the sear. And instead of a hammer falling, the striker just releases and goes forward in a straight line, impacting the primer. And again, going boom and hitting what you're aiming at, provided you did your job correctly. That is the main difference. Now we can do hammer fired in semi-automatic platforms, right? So here is a double action, single action, CZP07. So that means single action of the trigger drops the hammer and the hammer only, or I can just pull the trigger, cock the hammer, and drop the hammer at the same time. Double action, single action, hammer fired in a semi-automatic. You can have hammer fired in a revolver, but you cannot have a striker fired revolver, but you can absolutely have striker fired and hammer fired in a semi-automatic platform. Now, which one you like is entirely personal preference, right? There are some times, though, where you need to keep some things in mind. You will not see a single action gun, for the most part, without a safety that is striker fired. You have things like the Walther PDP and stuff. Those all have internal safeties that help everything go. Things like a hammer-fired gun, we're depending on a little bit of a different mechanism to provide the safety for what we have. So now, what we have to look at when we talk about these firearms themselves is a lot of people will say Glock is this, right? Glock is a double-action only handgun. This is not a single-action handgun, regardless of how you feel about the fact that you pull the trigger and it goes boom, right? This is a double action only handgun, meaning that this gun at rest is never fully cocked for it to go off. The initial part of you pulling the trigger on a Glock is you actually adding the last bit of rearward pressure to the spring on the striker and then breaking the sear and it dropping. You can actually demonstrate this with my Fusion Firearms XF Pro. If you look at the back of this guy, I have a hole. See that thing come out? That is at rest. This is not a fully cocked striker. As I pull this trigger, the double action brings the striker to the rear, just a little bit proud of the rear plate until it hits that sear wall and that falls, engaging that primer and causing the round to fire. But when we start dealing with these, the reason they are double action only is I cannot do anything unless this gun cycles to the next round. That's always been a perk of a revolver. If your round didn't go off, you just pull the trigger again and it will go off and go to the next available round. Now that we've established that, the next part of this is talking about safety. There are a lot of people that do not like firearms that do not have safeties. And I think firearms that have safeties need to meet some very specific criteria. A revolver does not have a safety. Why? Because it takes about 11 pounds on this pistol to bring that hammer all the way to the rear, rotate the cylinder into the next available lane of fire, and drop that hammer on there. Same thing, my CZP-07 right here. If this is how this gun was intended to be carried, this is an unsafe firearm without a safety if this is in your pants, because it takes very little effort to drop that hammer. But this firearm is actually carried at a half-cocked position. So now when I pull that trigger, I have a very heavy 10-pound trigger until it meets the sear wall and it drops that round. That is the difference between the two. Now, we have the same single action kind of world here, and this is my Fusion Firearms XP Pro. Fantastic firearm. I'll leave a link over here that goes to the review I did of this guy. I love this thing. This firearm itself is meant to be carried and is only functional if the hammer is to the rear, and it's known as something we would hear called cocked and locked. And that means that I have a round in the chamber, the hammer to the rear, with a very light 3-pound trigger that will break this guy off. But in order to carry this safely, I have to have external safeties to keep this gun from inadvertently discharging, because if I didn't have those, it takes very little pressure to make this firearm go off. So in order to make that safe, we have to have a thumb safety and we get a grip safety. Now, 1911s, 2011s are kind of the only thing that has a grip safety, unless you know you're part of that old school XD crowd with the grip zone, my bro. You're really only going to see that here. Outside of that, you will primarily only see the thumb safety. Thumb safeties are intuitive. You draw the firearm, you sweep the safety off with your hand as you're making your grip, and you break your shot. Now, things like a Glock, for example, the most misunderstood Fodor Pactive thing is that this does not have a safety. This has multiple safeties, and two of them I can explain to you very easily. One is this cool little dingus on the trigger, right? If I don't hit that dingus, I can't pull this trigger. If I do hit that dingus, I can easily pull this trigger. There is also a safety right on the top of your slide, about right here. And what that is that is known as a striker safety. So that striker safety has a block on it and it has a cutout. And as you move your trigger to the rear, it actually lifts up on that cutout, allowing the place for the striker to pass through and the firing pin to impact the primer. So there's two very simple safeties that lead to this being one of the safest firearms that have ever been created, and it's been used a lot. Now again, revolvers, no safeties at all. You know what your revolver is on your safety? This is my safety, sir. That is your safety. Don't do that if you don't want it to go off. Something like this guy, this Fusion XF, this also functions with a firing pin safety. It also has the little trigger dingus safety. I can't get this to go off unless I depress that little lever in the middle, making it go out. Now, why is all of that important? It is important to understand that the vast majority of modern day firearms are inherently insanely safe. You're not going to pick up a revolver with a 2-pound trigger for double action. It's just not going to happen, because this is what makes this gun so inherently safe. If that was not so safe, there's something known as the Fit Special. If you want to get really wigged out about an old school gun design, look that guy up, because they actually cut the whole front of the trigger guard off, because there's no danger of this inadvertently contacting something and firing. Now, if you have a single action only revolver, there is zero chance unless you have physically cocked that hammer of that guy going off. Now, somebody's going to be like, but I have a revolver. I've seen revolvers that do not have a hammer, and I just told you that all revolvers are in fact hammer fired. That's true. You have something like this little guy, right? My LCR from Ruger N22 long rifle, there is no hammer. Yes, there is. It's just inside of this shroud here. And what that means is, as I pull this trigger, that provides the inertia to hit the firing pin to make the round go off. That is what we're looking at in something you would see like this with a very shaved off back. These are made for concealment inside of a pocket, so you can draw it out. It doesn't get hung on things the way an external hammer would, because I can promise you, if you hang this guy out, you're gonna hang on this every single time. So that's kind of your 30,000 foot view of the basic operating principles behind a handgun. You have hammer fired or striker fired, and you have double action and single action, and they all have their merits. Just understand, if you have a single action only strike or semi-automatic firearm, you have to have safeties on it. If you have a double action of any kind, your safety is the trigger weight that's involved in it. Some rarities have a safety as well as all that other stuff, things like the Beretta 92, the original ones without the G model, the G stuff on it, where they are actually done and they have a safety that gets in the way and you activate it when you don't want to. If you don't know, you just trust me, it's a pain. What we're looking at though, if you have a single action only firearm, there is something that is required of you to make that work. In a revolver, that is thumbing the hammer to the rear, which manually rotates the cylinder to the next spot and allows your trigger to be set to be used. In a semi-automatic platform, you have to have some form of safeties on this guy, ensuring that it cannot just go off when you accidentally touch that very light trigger, right? Now, there are some perks, man. Single action only, when we start talking about these are the lightest trigger pulls you're ever gonna have on a handgun. They are the smoothest, fastest part of the triggers. That is one of the reasons 1911s and 2011s are so inherently easy to shoot and shoot accurately and to shoot fast. Even if you have a polymer version like this guy, right? There is no safety on this firearm, even though this is here, but it is because this decocks that firearm, and now I have that very heavy, very deliberate trigger press that allows the gun to go off. However, all of my subsequent shots are very fast with a very light trigger, and that's kind of what we're looking at when we start talking about that. So now that you know the difference between double action and single action, a revolver and a semi-auto, there are two additional things that people talk about, and that is compensators and ports. Now, they do the same thing, but they do it in a very different way. I do not have one of my ramjets or anything down here right now, but a compensator is on the end of the barrel, and it has an expansion chamber that allows that gas to expand and be vented in a specific direction, controlling muzzle rise. That is what that does, which decreases your perceived recoil. Then you have ported guns, and ported guns have been around forever, man. They've been porting revolvers forever, man. It's just a thing. And porting a firearm is nothing new, right? So this guy, we see the 5 ports across the top of my barrel on this XF Pro, and that means that when I fire this round, as that gas is expanding inside of the barrel behind the projectile, that gas is bleeding up, keeping my muzzle flatter and decreasing my felt recoil, my perceivable recoil. Even something like this XP Pro, you can look at the front here, I have ports cut into the front of this guy. There is a new version of the XP known as the XP Pro Comped. Yes, I will have one, and I am super excited about it because I love comped handguns. They're just way more fun to shoot, even though they're louder, but they are so much fun to shoot. And this thing was done so incredibly well. I can't wait to see what they did with the compensator itself. So there you go. There is your 30,000 foot view of what handguns are and how they actually function. Do you need a safety? Only if you're a semi-automatic carrier that is designed to be carried with the hammer back on the firearm, then yes, you need a safety. If you were running any double action, single action, semi-auto, striker fired semi-auto, no, you don't need a safety. The safeties are built into the firearm platform itself. If you have a revolver, you don't need a safety, because when people start talking about having safety features on revolvers, we get really dumb stuff like the Hillary hole. Handguns are fun, and you can pretty much do whatever you want. We can have crazy ported with the light and a red dot. We can have beautiful stainless 8-shot 357 Magnums. We can even have underwear guns like this LCR and 22 long rifle that weighs less than a pound, fully loaded with Federal punch. Has an excellent smooth trigger that is entirely predictable. I know where it's going to go and how it's going to get there. And we can even have fun stuff like this guy here with incredibly fast, smooth single action triggers that allow for crazy fast follow-up shots and really good accuracy with not as much work on your end. If I had to choose one personally, all, because America, that's why. No, honestly, if I had to choose one personally, if I could only have one kind of gun for the rest of my days, I'm gonna take a double action only striker fired handgun, or a double action or a single, just a striker fired handgun, mainly because I have so many hundreds of thousands of reps on a platform like a Glock. Very rarely do you see these in single action only, but when you do, you see something like the SIG 320 here that has a single action only striker, which means a fully cocked striker, a very light trigger, and a lot of lawsuits. So now you know. If I could only have one, I'd take a striker fired handgun, probably something in that Glock or M&P family. No, I don't know about the new Glock V. It's going to take a lot to replace this because the problem with Glock was always kind of the trigger. And now you're telling me that the new stuff, I can't use any of the aftermarket trigger stuff that exists. That's going to be a problem for me. If I could only have one, I would have that. If I could have two, I'm taking revolvers, man. I'm going to have my striker fired handgun and I'm taking my wheel guns because wheel guns are absolutely old school, cool Americana sexiness right here. And I don't know many people that would argue with 8 rounds of 357 Magnum. And it just looks good. So good. So guys, I am Uncle Freedom. Hopefully this helped answer some questions for you today. What's your favorite type of firearm? Striker, hammer, revolver, semi-auto, comped, ported, double action only, double action, single action only. What is your chosen and preferred method of stuff? Because we all have an opinion, we all have something we like more than other things, and I am really curious to know what you guys have. For my revolver fans out there, rejoice, man, because there is a lot of revolver content upcoming, and we're actually going to be looking at some of my really favorite revolvers that are just kind of cool guys here, like this 5-shot 40 Smith & Wesson Taurus Model 405. I adore this gun. Insanely smooth double action trigger, very light and crisp single action on this guy, easily stageable, and it shoots 40 Smith & Wesson, all of my defensive loads, and I can run it all day long with no discomfort because this grip is actually really freaking nice. I love this gun. I have a 9mm version too, and I use it all the freaking time because it's just an awesome freaking platform. But if I could only have one, man, I'm going to take my 357 Magnum with my 38 wad cutters and Spear Gold Dots, and I'm going to go take my ball and go home. So guys, I am Uncle Freedom. Let me know what you thought down below. I am curious. Send this to people that you have that want an explanation about what things are, and try to help our future gun owners and current gun owners that don't know as much as they should be better than they were the day before. So guys, I am Uncle Freedom. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Until next time, I'll see you later.